the second lens, which data can be helpful, is at the client level. So this is kind of taking a step up from the engagement and, kind of looking at the relationship with the client. And, with clients, obviously at the surface level, the revenue and, maybe contribution, the profit, contribution of that client is important, but then there's definitely more to this. And so, what are some other data points that agency leaders could review?
Yeah, I think with a long enough time horizon, you can see like what's your client tenure. So how long have they been with you, and with that, like what's the lifetime value of that client? So not just looking at one project or one engagement, but over several years. How much have they contributed? And then from that kind of broader look, at an annual basis, are they profitable? Can you see, maybe when you first started with them 3 years ago, you're, very profitable, but then over the years, you've had some margin compression, and then now you're working actually at a loss or, at a smaller margin with this client. So I think just looking on a longer time horizon to see if there's any good trends there.
Yeah, because if you have client relationships that last, more than a few years, it's always interesting to take a look at and glean insights because, sometimes depending on what your service offering is, there's definitely a shape to your engagements, right? So, let's say on the, something like website design development, you typically have kind of this upfront big project where it's a redesign, migration, or whatever, and then it kind of, tapers into a ongoing kind of maintenance, support and maintenance, maybe optimization type of work. But then you might have other relationships where you have multiple kind of spurts of campaigns. So you have like kind of some years you might have like a really big billing kind of peak, and then others it's kind of more chill and between seasons too. So it's very interesting to kind of take a look and analyze it because then you get a sense of like, all right, like these are the types of clients that we have, and you can kind of dig even deeper into that.
Yeah, and actually on that point, it's interesting to think about. It doesn't have to be so linear. So let's say your business model is you might do an initial project and your margin might be lower, but you'll make up a lot of the margin later on. That could work, and I think it's just like understanding how that the shape of the margin is, and being intentional about potentially retention in that model, and how important that is to the business.
Yeah, and to
Yeah.
that point, retention. I mean, the client satisfaction is super important. So there's some signals there. I think if you're using different types of client survey feedback mechanisms, NPS, CSAT, or just even forms with questions on how you're performing. Those are data points too to understand. Okay, like are we doing a good job of servicing these clients, and what are areas that we can improve in, and also just more importantly, like what are the trends, like where is our level of service as an agency?
Yeah. Yeah, and even thinking about, there's so many different data points. Like when you look at a client relationship, you'll get some feedback from the team on how is it to work with this
Yeah.
client, with this company. Is there any friction that always happens? Is there a lot of pushback at every turn? And then from a finance standpoint, like their payment history, like sometimes if that's related, where like they're always holding their invoices and they're not paying on time. There's always a challenge to chase down. You know different payments and invoices. So like these are aspects of a relationship that, it could be highly profitable, but if there's a lot of friction there, it may not be worth the struggle there.
Yeah, and if you layer on top of all this data that we just talked about, if you layer on kind of the client type, so this is the the basic stuff about the client, like what industry or sector are they kind of in, what how big are the clients, and just maybe even like what maturity level is their business. Are you working with a founder at a startup, or are you kind of dealing with kind of a scale up organization and multiple stakeholders, maybe a director of marketing or a VP of ecom or something like that, and then also like just what what is the type of kind of work you're doing with them? Maybe is it a strategic relationship where you're coming in to do a lot of road mapping and high level thinking consulting for them, or is it more like execution level, like, hey, we're here to like just fix a very specific problem and get it done fast? And so I think if you layer on that kind of categorization across the client, then all of a sudden you can start to segment the clients more easily.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, there's so many data points around client engagement, right? We talked about the financial aspect, the relationship, et cetera, and it's almost focusing on the most again, like what's the most impactful, like how do you get 80% of the signal to determine what to focus on. I think like client profitability is an important, a key one to look at. It's like what of all your clients, which ones drive the most profit, and how is that profit shaped? And then from a team perspective, like do they, and maybe it correlates in some cases, maybe it doesn't, but are there certain clients that like really um, take a lot of time or energy from the team to
Yeah.
deliver that revenue, and it's almost, yeah, it's a balance of that where there could be downstream impact of high profit but high stress for the team. It may not be the best mix.
Yeah, and one thing you're talking about reminds me, like this is something when it comes to data, this is something that's common, the Pareto principle or 80/20 principle, right? Where yeah, like 20% of something, is probably responsible for 80% of the results. And so, this could be like, yeah, 20% of the clients may be responsible for 80% of the headaches. 20% of the clients might be responsible for 80% of the profits. And
Yep.
and 20% of the clients might be responsible for 80% of the most exciting work that you could showcase. So it
Yeah.
just shows up everywhere, and it's kind of that's why segmentation is very important, because you can identify and surface this dynamic across your analysis, and just makes this kind of work that much more insightful.